Hi there. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Ryan Nobles in Washington on the final day of a historic Supreme Court term, with the court issuing decisions today on everything from birthright citizenship to transgender rights to the role money can play in politics. And the most highly anticipated decision of the term, the court rejecting President Trump's controversial effort to end birthright citizenship, ruling that the executive order the president signed on his first day of his second term is unlawful. The decision was 6-3, with 5 justices ruling that the order violated the 14th Amendment. Chief Justice John Roberts, writing in the majority opinion, quotes, "Citizenship then and now was the right to have rights, to freely participate in our political community. The framers of the 14th Amendment extended that promise to every free-born person in this land. We keep that promise today." President Trump calling the decision, quote, "bad for our country," while also claiming without evidence that the ruling gave Congress a roadmap for legislation to do away with birthright citizenship. House Speaker Mike Johnson criticizing the court's decision, which he learned about in real time during his weekly news conference.
It just came down.
Oh dear.
That the decision is children born in the United States, parents unlawfully or temporarily present, are subject to the jurisdiction of the United States and are citizens at birth under the 14th Amendment Citizenship Clause. What's your reaction to that, Mr. Speaker?
Well, I need to read the opinion, okay? But obviously that's, I mean, you could say that's a textualist, originalist view. However, I do think that this has been grossly abused in recent years. And I will say I'm very disappointed in that outcome. I think it subjects the country to serious challenges going forward, and we'll have to deal with it as a Congress.
Speaker Johnson also insisting that Republicans are going to look at legislation, potential legislation on birthright citizenship. The ACLU's legal director, who argued this case before the Supreme Court, responded, basically telling the speaker, good luck.
Look, millions and millions of Americans, the vast majority of the American public, loves birthright citizenship the way it is, the way that it was ratified in this country in the 1800s. This is a pillar of who we are as a nation. So if they want to try and overturn it by constitutional amendment, good luck to them, because they're going against the will of the people of this country, of the United States.
But the Supreme Court also delivered victories to the president and Republicans today, first by upholding state bans on transgender athletes and girls in women's sports in a pair of 6-3 decisions along ideological lines. While the rulings were focused on bans in West Virginia and Idaho, they will impact 25 other states with similar restrictions. And in another 6-3 decision, the justices sided with Republicans, striking down campaign finance rules that limit how much national political parties can spend in coordination with individual candidates. We'll have more on that later in the show. But to kick things off, joining me from the White House is NBC News senior policy reporter Shannon Pettypiece. Also with me, NBC News senior legal correspondent Laura Jarrett and NBC News senior Supreme Court reporter Lawrence Hurley. Shannon, let's start with you. Now, most legal experts had expected the Supreme Court to uphold birthright citizenship. Was the White House surprised by today's decision?
Well, you may recall, Ryan, that President Trump actually attended these oral arguments, which was a highly unusual move for a president. Now, he left after about 30 minutes before the arguments were completed and before the justices asked some really prodding questions. But, of course, my colleagues here have reported extensively that it did seem the court was skeptical of the argument that the administration was making. So it should not come as a big surprise to the White House the way this ruling came down.
And Shannon, it does seem pretty clear from the ruling that birthright citizenship is enshrined in the 14th Amendment. But now President Trump is calling on Congress to end birthright citizenship through legislation. Given that that's not going to happen, what is the White House's strategy here?
Yeah, well, and just to be perfectly clear, this is what that would take to have a constitutional amendment. You would have to get 2/3 of the House and the Senate to vote to make that change. Then you would have to get the states to ratify it. You would have to get 38 of the 50 states to ratify that change. You cover the Hill regularly. I'll let you predict the odds on how likely that is to pass. But that is a long haul ahead if Congress wants to do something. So what I think we could see instead, and what our reporting has indicated, is that this White House will continue to push and make efforts to find whatever levers and tools they can pull to crack down not just on illegal immigration, but on legal pathways that immigrants have used for years or decades, to try and crack down on those pathways as well. That is sort of a shift in this second term from what we saw in the first term, where it is not just immigration raids and border security and a border wall. It is also going after these legal pathways that have really been established in our immigration systems, similar to the ruling we saw yesterday around this temporary protective status that would affect not just people who are seeking to come here legally, but people who have been here legally in this country for decades in some cases, who could lose their legal status. That seems to be what the White House is indicating it will continue to pursue.
To answer your question, Shannon, there is zero chance of a 2/3 vote in the House and Senate to repeal the 14th Amendment. That will never happen, at least not in my lifetime, I don't think. Let's talk about this other ruling, and that is on transgender athletes. This has been a huge issue for President Trump. He's talked on and on about keeping transgender athletes out of girls' and women's sports. What's the administration's reaction to this?
Yeah, and it was a major issue on the campaign trail, I'll say, too, from the rallies and events I covered by Republicans, not just President Trump, but an issue that came up over and over again in this last campaign. The White House is taking the win here. They are claiming a victory. The president put out a social media post saying this issue is off the table now. Well, that's not necessarily the case. The court has said the states can decide on this issue. About half the states have some sort of legislation in place that would restrict who can participate in women's sports. But there's certainly a number of states, including some that have protections for trans athletes, still out there. So this is not necessarily an issue that has gone away. It is settled in some of these states, but it potentially could be one that plays out politically in the future here.
Okay, Shannon, thank you for that reporting. Let's bring Laura into the conversation now to break down these decisions. You know, Laura, I'm sure that there were some that support birthright citizenship that were a little concerned that maybe today's decision would be murky, that there would be an interpretation that can come out of it that could make people with birthright that were born here in this country and earn their citizenship feel a bit vulnerable. But it seemed pretty clear, especially from the opinion wrote by the Chief Justice, that he was providing a degree of clarity here. If you are born in this country, you are a citizen. Explain how this decision was so important and the clarity that it offered.
Yeah, there's nothing murky about this decision, Ryan. And it's not just the Chief Justice, it's also Justice Barrett and even Justice Kavanaugh to some extent, which I'm sure we will get into. Finding this executive order just simply went too far. You know, Ryan, it wasn't that long ago that the idea of upending birthright citizenship was really sort of a fringe theory. It wasn't that it was out there, but it was never pressed this way. And then yet on day one of his second term, the president did this, but it never got off the ground, Ryan, right? Like, this was marred in lawsuits from the very beginning. It's never gone into effect. And so there was sort of almost an assumption that this would get struck down today. I think even the president, you saw it in sort of his comments over the last few weeks and even yesterday, an understanding that this was likely to get struck down. We just didn't know exactly what the vote totals would be. We didn't know exactly what the reasoning would be. But the Chief Justice making it crystal clear today, this has been the understanding of the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment is not vague. It has been sort of the law on the land since the 1890s, and nothing about the Constitution has changed. The Chief Justice took on the arguments from the dissent, took on the arguments about so-called anchor babies, this disparaging term that's been used by the president and some of his allies to suggest people are parking themselves in the United States to be able to get birthright citizenship for their children. The Chief Justice saying, whatever that situation is on the ground, the Constitution is what it is, and it hasn't changed.
Lawrence, let's bring you into the conversation now. Because to Laura's point, it is interesting that they do appear to be taking an originalist position here. That, and in fact, Speaker Johnson, who fancies himself a constitutional lawyer, even said that in his remarks. I want to read to you what Clarence Thomas wrote. The court has repurposed the 14th Amendment to protect its own set of preferred rights that the Reconstruction Congress never contemplated and that they cannot find support in its text. Today, the court does so again by recognizing a constitutional right to citizenship for the children of all foreign birth tourists and illegal aliens. It's interesting because whenever there are arguments made against the Second Amendment, they say they don't apply to today's version of the United States. It seems as though the conservatives on the court are trying to have it both ways here. In this case, they think, well, this doesn't apply to the way things are now.
Yeah, I mean, the court has been criticized quite a bit over the last few years about selectively applying originalism or using it in ways that suit, partisan ends. And in this case, the dissenters certainly are pushing theories that, as Laura said, were very much fringe theories. This is the understanding that the court embraced today, is the understanding that we've always understood it to mean, including Congress. When Congress amended immigration laws, they imported that same language from the 14th Amendment into the immigration laws. And that's, showed that Congress in the 1950s understood the 14th Amendment to mean exactly what it means now.
And Laura, President Trump called on Congress to end birthright citizenship. Speaker Johnson said that Congress would deal with the issue. I want you to hear what Speaker Johnson had to say about that.
We need to address the issue as quickly and as efficiently as we can. Some are implying that, or suggesting that it may require a constitutional amendment. And as you know, that is a large undertaking. But clearly, birthright citizenship has been But I just saw an excerpt from the great Justice Clarence Thomas, who said that at the original drafting of that language, it was meant to really value and enhance citizenship, and now it's being used to devalue citizenship. I think it's a pretty good way to summarize it. I'm with Clarence Thomas. I'm with the president. I think the court made the wrong decision.
He didn't really explain, though, Laura, what Congress could actually do to impact this and change today's decision. Shannon laid out how difficult it is to amend the Constitution. Is that really the only solution here, is a new amendment to the Constitution? There's no legislation or law they could pass to fix this, right?
No, and that's why he's sort of having to acquiesce to the idea that it's likely going to be a very heavy lift. He's citing Justice Clarence Thomas, who didn't win. He's in the dissent. He's not the majority in this case. And so obviously the president and his allies on the Hill are disappointed, and they want to be able to sort of pivot to a path forward. But the short and the long of this, Ryan, is that they lost.
Yeah, and there was a little bit of nuance in the decision, Lawrence. The overall birthright citizenship decision related to the executive order was 6-3, but on the specific issue of whether or not it violated the 14th Amendment, and Laura mentioned this before, is that Justice Kavanaugh basically wrote his own opinion on this. How unusual is that? And why did Justice Kavanaugh, who did vote with the 6-3 majority, disagree on that specific part of it?
Well, one thing that's remarkable about it, I think, is going in, as we've already discussed, this was considered to be a fringe theory just a few years ago when Trump's first term, when he first raised this issue, and everyone across left and right, scholars, politicians, condemned it, including the then Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan. And this time, you got 4 justices on the Supreme Court, almost one short of a majority, saying that they would have agreed with President Trump's interpretation of the 14th Amendment. So that's like a huge sea change in the law, even though they lost. The fact that it's gathered that momentum, whether it's through politics and through the courts, and the fact that Justice Kavanaugh embraced it, even though he found this narrower ground to rule against the president, is still quite remarkable.
Yeah. All right. So let's turn now and talk about the transgender athletes' decision. Laura, walk us through the implications of what this means across the country.
Yeah, Ryan, it was about 2 states in particular, West Virginia and Idaho, but it's so much broader than that. And I think that it's worth underscoring, just how many states had bans like this, that were watching these cases very closely. The court could have cut this any number of different ways. It had constitutional arguments, it had statutory arguments. And at the end of the day, the court really went all the way there on both scores, saying essentially the states can go quite far in banning transgender women and girls from sports teams like this. We had been interested to see what Justice Gorsuch would do on this issue, given that just a few years ago, he was the one who authored the landmark ruling giving transgender workers protections under a landmark civil rights statute. But Justice Gorsuch, I should say today, making it clear he did not see the situation around employment the same as it relates to kids in school, Ryan. So it's massive implications nationwide.
But before you go, Laura, this is the one side of it, right? It is upholding the bans. But there are other lawsuits that are taking place challenging laws in California and Connecticut that allow transgender athletes to compete in girls and women's sports. How does this decision affect any of those suits?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how those play out through the courts. They're not yet readily teed up for the Supreme Court to take those up, but you can be sure that's exactly where they're going. Typically, when these things have come up, if you think about other cases, sort of analogous situations as it relates to reproductive rights, when the court essentially says, look, somebody doesn't have rights enshrined under the Constitution, and they kick it back to the states, it doesn't mean that states can't then also have broader rights, right? And certain states couldn't have broader rights for transgender athletes. But I think it's too early to tell exactly how the court would treat that, and it would have to depend on exactly how it got raised for them.
Okay, Lawrence and Laura, terrific conversation. Laura, you should do a podcast where you talk about legal issues. Has anyone thought of that?
We have it all covered. We have it all covered.
We'd have it all. Just take what we did here today and put that on your podcast. We could do it.
Here's the scoop.
We've got it all taken for you. Here's the scoop with Laura Jarrett. All right, Lawrence Hurley, thank you for being here as well. We appreciate it.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.